Shantimidandasya Jnananjanachalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Astajati Shatharine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'm very grateful, very honored to be with all of you this afternoon. Thank you for coming. Throughout the world, your company, Intel, is very much affected and influenced directly and indirectly. And it is quite amazing in how the world today has such companies as Intel that really affect everyone's life. How we affect people's lives is very important. There is a simple analogy that a knife could be either good or bad depending on the values of the person who's holding that knife. A thief will use the knife to kill someone in order to satisfy his or her own selfish desires. And a surgeon will use the same knife to save a person's life. So in the same way, practically everything in this world is potentially good or bad, potentially material or spiritual, according to the values and the realizations of the person utilizing it. The word education is derived from the word edukana, which actually means to bring out what is within ourselves. And from a spiritual perspective, we can understand that inherently within everyone there is pure goodness. But according to how much we forget that own essence within ourselves, then we become very clouded in our understanding, and we can be vulnerable to not only so much suffering, but also being an instrument to inflict sufferings on others, directly or indirectly. It's very, very important that as human beings, we take responsibility to actually reconnect with our own potential. As the MC today explained in his introduction, I hitchhiked to India when I was 19, looking for some spiritual meaning and fulfillment in our life. So in the process, I only had one semester of college. When I left home, I told my mother and father, When I left home, I told my mother and father I'll be going for a summer vacation to Europe and I will return in 2 months. That was in 1970. And they're still waiting for me to return. But I see them a lot. So I don't know so much about the details of the technologies your esteemed company has mastered, but I can speak from a very common person's perspective. That when a person opens a computer, they see the screen and they have the keyboard and various things are coming to the screen. We don't really see how the processing of all of this information is happening. It's really the effects we see, but what's actually happening is very invisible to the eyes. And in many ways, it's too subtle for the eyes to even conceive of, but it's happening. So in the same way, in this world, we have a physical reality. That which can be experienced and perceived by the senses. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the flesh. But there are aspects of our being that we're experiencing every day that are so subtle the senses can't perceive them. But there's such a powerful reality in our lives. A thought. You can't see or touch or taste or smell a thought. It's so subtle. But how it affects us and how it affects the world. One little thought in one person can actually change the entire landscape of humanity in the world. The concept of building bombs, the concepts of revolution. In Mumbai, I often visit a house of one person, and their living room is exactly the way it was many, many decades ago. And the reason was a few people, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and just a few other, Mr. Patel, they met in this living room along with Ganesham Das Birla, and they discussed the concept of getting independence from Britain. Now in those days, there was a saying that the sun never sets in the British Empire. And England controlled India for about 200 years. And they really were attached to it. A lot of resources, a lot of military personnel, crown jewel of the British Empire. So here's just a few people sitting in a living room, they had no resources, but they just had an idea, they just had a thought. The thought was, let's get independence from England. And from that thought, they started to speak and they started to organize, and the rest is history. And here in America, I guess we had kind of the same problem with England. little before that. We also wanted independence. And a few people, Thomas Jefferson and Mr. Smith and some of the early freedom fighters, George Washington, they just had an idea, they just had a thought. And that thought. In Paradise Lost, Milton explains the mind is a thing of itself. It could make heaven into hell or hell into heaven. So much on the basis of how we perceive. And subtler than the mind even is the intelligence. The mind, through the senses, it perceives something, and then the mind reacts, I like or I don't like. It reacts with either happiness or distress or pleasure or pain or something, or craving or aversion. But then it's the intellect that actually creates all sorts of discrimination and plans in how to achieve it. So on a computer we see certain things with our senses, but behind it all is this, like what the mind and the intellect is to the human experience, that's actually making all of these things possible. But then there's the current, the electrical current. It may come from an outlet in the wall, it may come from a battery, it may come from Wi-Fi's or whatever, but that current, all of these different components within a computer can't really interact with each other and can't really manifest it to us without that current. So in the same way in our life, there is a current. There is a force that gives the mind, the intellect, physical body and their senses the capacity to interact. And that current is consciousness. And according to the great wisdom cultures of the world, that consciousness, that living force, is who we truly are. In the Bible it is said, "What profiteth a man who gains the whole world but loses his own soul?" In the Bhagavad Gita, the great scripture of India, it is said, "Najayate mriyate va kadachit." The nature of that living force that's within all of us is it is eternal. It's never born and it never dies. Nahanyate hanyamane sarire. And the nature of that living force within us is Satchit Ananda. It's everlasting. It's actually full of knowledge. And it's full of happiness. That's who we are. Now there's different levels of happiness. The physical things can give happiness to the senses. Food can give happiness to the tongue. Seeing something beautiful can give some happiness to the eyes. Touching something that's pleasing to us will give happiness to the senses. On a subtler level, adoration, distinction, fame, these things can give some real happiness to the mind. Being appreciated. But none of these things can actually give happiness to the heart. Things can give some temporary pleasure to the mind and senses. But what is it that gives happiness to the heart? love. To feel loved and to give love is pleasure for the heart. If a little girl has parents that are just so busy making money that they have no time for her, she may be dressed very pretty with nice clothes and nice ornaments, but she lives in misery. Because ultimately, all those things, if they're really seen as an expression of love, then they can really give happiness. But the thing is, it's the love that touches the heart. I often give an example in my own childhood. Little boys are usually, and men are the same way, we're usually forgetful of little detailed things that ladies oftentimes are very attentive to. In my mother's life, it was her birthday or her wedding anniversary. If my father didn't get her something for the wedding anniversary, it wasn't the thing. It was just, how could you forget such an important day in our life? And for my father, why are you so worried about that? Of course, I love you. Why do I have to remember the anniversary day? But for her, if you really love me, you'll remember this day. So on her birthday, I would always forget. But somehow or other, if I remembered, I really wanted to get her something. So one year, I ran to the backyard, and she had a rose garden. It was her own personal rose garden. And she only had like 6 roses, because we just had a small house and a really tiny backyard. And there was just a couple roses that were growing at the time. And I broke one off. And I ran in and I gave it to her and said, "Happy birthday." She put it to her nose and smelled it. She put it to her forehead. She put it to her heart. And she started to cry in happiness. She said, "Thank you very much." It's not the thing that counts. It's the thought that counts. It's the love. Because I loved her enough, and that rose was an expression of the love. It was what it represented that actually gave her great joy in the heart. It wasn't the rose, because it was her rose. They actually stole it from her. And she knew that. It was one less rose in her garden to show the neighbors. But the heart craves for love. And the heart responds to love. And ultimately, when we don't have that, we can't be happy people. In my traveling and wandering around the world in so many places, I see simple people who are really miserable because they don't have that. And I see billionaires and millionaires who are really miserable people because they don't have that. And I see little villagers in straw huts who are really happy because they have that. And I see millionaires and billionaires who are really happy because they have that. The origin of that love, from a theistic perspective, from a devotional perspective, is the soul's nature to experience God's love. And the soul's experience to be awakened to the reality of how to show our love for our source, or for God, who in my tradition we call Krishna. It's like watering the root of a tree. If we want to be happy, like nourishing a tree. There are so many fruits and flowers and twigs and leaves. If you pour water on them, it's going to give some sense of nourishment, but it's very shallow. But if you water the root of the tree sufficiently, that water will naturally extend to every part of the tree. And it's a healthy tree. So when our own hearts, our own souls are finding fulfillment in experiencing the love that is within us, then naturally, when we love God, we want to extend that love to everyone, because we see our relationship with everyone. When we understand who we truly are as eternal spiritual beings who are actually in a very perfected state inherently. Our imperfections is just we've lost connection with that. That spiritual connection. We may have our intellect and we may have our methods and our organizations, and we may have our technology, and we may have our sciences, and we may have our militaries, and we may have our financial institutions, and we may have our farms and our fields for agriculture. But if we're disconnected from that real current of who we truly are and where we're really getting our consciousness from. In other words, if we're disconnected from ourselves, then nothing really works very well. Emerson said that. One of the great transcendentalist writers of America. He said the reason the world is in such disorder and there's so much conflict and humanity is practically in heaps is because people are disconnected from their own selves. When we make that connection, when we feel that current, the current of grace, the current of love that's within us, then the challenges and the difficulties that are inevitable in this temporary situation of material life, we see them for what they really are. We don't become disturbed by them. Our values and our integrity are not compromised by situations. The difference between deep happiness and very superficial, shallow happiness can be explained in a very simple way. When we're reaching out to find happiness, then our happiness is going to be completely subjected to conditions. And conditions always change. Conditions of what the weather is, what the financial market is, how people treat me, what's the condition of my body and mind today. So many situations. But when we actually make that reconnection within, when we take that journey within, then our happiness, our fulfillment, our purpose is no longer subjected to conditions. Rather, we express the great wealth that we find within ourselves through what we do. And then our talents, our intelligence, our wealth, whatever it may be, is no longer a desperate requirement for me to be happy to get more of it. Or rather, we want to get more and more of it because they're facilities to express the joy, the fulfillment, and the compassion that I found within myself. like to tell a little story of once this year in a place called Nasik. There's a Kumbh Mela. Every 12 years, tens of millions of people come to a riverbank for a holy festival. Sometimes in Prayag, sometimes Ujjain, sometimes Haridwar, and this year it's in Nasik. So long ago, I was sitting on the banks of the rivers Ganges, Jamuna, and Saraswati. It was summertime, month of May at Prayag. It was so hot. Probably about 110 degrees. And it was no time. There was no one around. Except me. Nobody wanted to be there. I went there a couple of years ago, the same exact place. And at the time I was there, according to government statistics, 30 million people were there that day at that spot, trying to take their bath. And during the month, it was 80 million. When I was there in 1971, I was all alone because it was just too hot. And there was a hawk that was above me. He was flying in the air, getting lower and lower and lower, and I was looking up at him. He had brown feathers and white feathers, some golden feathers. His eyes were bright yellow, and he was gazing down, obviously, intensely looking down for something to eat. And he was circling lower and lower and lower until he was maybe about 10 meters above my head. I looked up at his claws, really sharp and black. They were moving in and out, which means he was really waiting to attack something. And as he went lower and lower, his claws were moving faster and faster and faster. And I was thinking, I wonder who he's going to attack. And I looked around, and I was the only living being in sight. So I said a little prayer, because he had a long, pointed beak, too. Suddenly, the hawk, headlong, dove into the water. And while in the water, underwater, there was a skirmish. I saw all sorts of agitation. About 10 seconds later, the hawk emerged. There was a fish in its claws. He just came out of the water maybe 20 feet in front of me. And I looked at the fish. That little fish was so much in anxiety. He looked so bewildered. Maybe it was a girl. I really don't know. I can't tell. I didn't go to school long enough. Study those subjects. But that little fish was flapping and flapping and flapping desperately. As the hawk flew higher and higher and then into a forest. And I was thinking, what am I supposed to learn from this? It's a very common thing to see. We probably see things like this every day, but we just don't really take note of it. But it says in the Bible, seek and ye shall find. If we knock on the door will open. If we're really looking for growing in this world, every situation can give us beautiful messages. Situations that we like or don't like, on the emotional level, can actually change our hearts in a very positive way if we're looking for opportunity. So I was thinking that that fish is a lot like so many people. The fish was probably just like any other day, just living its life, swimming upstream, downstream, across stream. May have been with a family, maybe friends, swimming together, playing, looking for food, having romantic relations. It's like any day. At the least expected moment, the hawk ripped it out of its comfort zone. And similarly, in the world today, these things happen. The least expected moment, something could happen. It may be something, it may be someone that really creates a disturbance. In Nepal, just recently, we have a hospital in Mumbai, the Bhaktivedanta Hospital. And they called me and sent me messages after they came back from that earthquake. And they were telling me how much suffering. But then they told me that there were people there who they lost their homes, they lost their business, they lost so much of their families. But they were helping bringing food and helping bringing doctors and others to people who were suffering like them. And they were completely joyful. Because even in that difficult situation, they found the joy of giving people who really needed something. And that's something very special. Because they found something deeper than the apparent situation. And similarly, if that fish was swimming deeper in the river, the hawk could not touch it. Similarly, as long as our happiness, as long as our thirst for pleasure, our fulfillment, our purpose and meaning in life is on a very shallow level. Shallow means very much on the basis of sensual and mental situations. Then reversals can really affect when the hawk of faith strikes, hawk of fate. But if we find that deeper place within ourselves, that's where we're finding our happiness, and nothing can touch it. And then our life has a whole different meaning. It's not about trying to fill a void constantly and trying to forget the void through intoxications and all sorts of entertainments that just kind of temporarily makes us forget the emptiness. It's about sharing that fullness that we have through whatever we do. And what a motivating force that could be. We have technologists and scientists and politicians and business people and farmers and industrialists and educators who are really expressing that fullness of their compassion through whatever they do. And that's all of our potential. If we just take this journey within. It's our natural inheritance to really be happy. And the greatest joy is when we connect with that happiness, is to share that happiness. Happiness is not something that we just keep to ourselves, because true happiness is love. And love, its nature forever, is always to give, to be compassionate, to share. Thank you very much. Yes.
Kids have grown up. What's the best way to show my love?
The best way to show your love for your children who have grown up.
Or you can hug them when they become adults. How can you
The fullest love is for the body, the mind, and the soul. Because ultimately, they are that eternal soul. And by taking care of their bodies and taking care of, through providing food and shelter and clothing, and by taking in other things like that, by taking care of the mind through appreciation, through encouragement, through good example. If all of those things are in harmony with our concern and care for the true self within them, their soul, then we are actually giving the fullest, richest love to them, to their body, their mind, and their soul. The concept of yoga is union. Uniting or harmonizing the body with the mind with the soul with the Supreme Soul or God, and in that unity, creating harmony between our own self and all other living beings in all species, in all races, in all religions, and also seeing our harmony with Mother Nature, the environment. The ecological problems that we're having today are really based on a problem of a human spirit, because we're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from each other, we're disconnected from nature. We're not showing the proper respect, compassion, love. So it's a very deep subject, it's a very universal subject, and it's a very crucial subject. And when we're raising our children, if we have that connection, we can help to give that connection. So whether the children are very small or whether they're very grown up, through our own compassion, through our own connection with God and ourselves, especially how we show our love. What is the example of our own life? Is a very special way in which children. Does that answer your question? Yes. You can speak really loud because you're so far away.
So I know that we can control the mind, body, and heart, but soul, how do we control it? Is it through spirituality, or is there any other some deeper research going on to control the soul?
To control the soul? We are the soul. Spiritual path is to reconnect with the soul so that our soul controls our body and our mind, our words and our actions. That's an enlightened life. When our words and our actions are in harmony with the true nature of the soul, which means it is with compassion and love that we are motivated. And in our tradition, we make that connection through, in the tradition I follow, through this chanting of mantras, the beginning of the talk that I'm giving today. We chanted this mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This divine sound, its special blessing is it connects us to that spiritual actual essence that's within us, our true self. It connects us with that treasure house of love and compassion that is who we really are. And with God and with each other. There are many names of God, different traditions, and many different types of mantras. And there are different types of spiritual processes through prayer, through puja, in which we actually make that connection. And if we give quality time in our life to make that connection, then it enhances everything else we do. Then we're not controlling our soul. We're connecting to the beauty of the soul. And that beauty controls everything we do. Is there another question? Yes.
Thank you for this response. So do you have any practical tips on diving deep within my daily basis, in our day-to-day, fast-paced life?
Practical tip. Try to evaluate what's really important in your life. Recently, one of my dear friends passed away. In his life, he was in his 80s when he left us. He was one of the biggest industrialists and business people in all of India, in the history of India. And he accomplished so many things, and he established groundbreaking alliances with foreign corporations, back in the 60s and 70s, which kind of laid the groundwork for what India is today. But he met a guru when he was on the top of his career. He was one of the 3 most successful, wealthy business houses in all of India. And when he met his guru, in that company of an enlightened person, he really had to reevaluate himself. That, I have so much and I keep making more and more and more and more and more and more, but it never ends. What happened to the quality of my life? I'm so focused on quantity of accomplishments. What happened to the quality within myself? So he began to use whatever he had, and he was more enthusiastic to work, because he started using these things with compassion. At his funeral, some of the most accomplished, and there were common villagers there at his funeral, and there were some of the most accomplished historical politicians, business people, philanthropists, they were all there. And as people were talking in his memorial service, nobody said anything about how much money he had. Nobody said anything about the great revolutionary, groundbreaking business deals he made, which he did. They all talked about his compassion, his kindness, his humility. He had so much, but he was still such a humble person. He had so much, but he still cared about so many. Nobody loves you for what you have. People love you for who you are. People love you for your goodness. They may fear you. They may envy you. They may, for stuff that you have. It's like I was just yesterday with my dear friend Shyam Sundar. And he was very, very best friends with George Harrison of the Beatles. And the Beatles really made it to the top of the world as far as popularity and accomplishments, well, business, music industry. And he had everything. He had everything materially a person could possibly want. He was still young, but there was an emptiness. And he had enough spiritual sensitivity to recognize that. And he saw other people, they didn't recognize it, and people that were trying to be like him and coming close to him, they were overdosing on drugs, and they were dying, or they were doing so many things, and they were so many difficulties. What's it all for? And he found that love, that meaning, that fulfillment, that purpose in his understanding of God, which was Krishna, and through this chanting. And he just loved to do simple things like gardening. And he did this Bangladesh benefit concert. As far as I understand, it was the first time rock and roll musicians did a benefit for people who were suffering. And he established something that has been going on ever since. Because he used his fame, he used his musical talents, he used his influence to do something wonderful for people. And that was more meaningful than getting gold and platinum records. So when my dear friend passed from the world, this is what people recognized him for. His goodness, his compassion, his love. What do we really want in life? If we understand that spiritual connection, which can, on an external level, it can really free us from suffering due to stress. It can free us from depression. It can free us from anxiety. But on a deeper level, it actually connects us with real fulfillment, real love. And empowers us. Empowers our intelligence, empowers our body, empowers everything to do something wonderful. So if we understand that, we'll give some time to it. Just like you may be very busy, but still you give some time for eating and sleeping. Because what if you don't? You're not going to have the same quality of work. You could probably make a little more money for a while if you give up eating and sleeping and use that time. But you need that to give quality to everything you do. So if we want a spiritual quality in our life, if we want to make that connection beyond the temporary, ever-changing situations of the world, we need to give some time to pray, to meditate, to chant God's names, to be in events like today, where people are actually talking about it and inspiring each other. If you have a strong foundation, then even if a storm comes, the house will stand. But if you don't have a strong foundation, then even if you have the most magnificent palace, if a storm comes, it will collapse. So we can make elaborate arrangements for our happiness, but storms are going to come. You don't see the foundation. Just like you don't see the Intel processors when you're doing the computer. But that Intel processor is facilitating everything your computer is doing. That's my understanding of this. So in the same way, it's very important. And the current that's energizing it is so important. So in our life, if we have a strong spiritual foundation, whatever may come, we stand. Our integrity, our values, our compassion, stands. Because we have invested some of our time and energy in developing that inner foundation within ourselves. Is that practical? Thank you.
This is the last question online. What is the hierarchy of mind, body, and soul trinity?
Can you say again?
What is the hierarchy of mind, body, and soul trinity?
What is the hierarchy of body, mind, and soul?
Trinity.
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 Three in one. And all.
I don't really. Trinity means body, mind, and soul. The hierarchy, I think we explained it, is Bhagavad Gita tells very simple. It says, higher than the body is the senses, because the senses are the part of the body that really perceive things. Higher than the senses is the mind, because it's the mind that actually responds to the experiences of the senses. Higher than the mind is the intelligence, which can actually, make plans in which it can maneuver the facilities of the mind and the senses to fulfill its purpose. And higher than the intelligence is the Atma, the living force, the soul, who is actually the witness of all of it. Because when the soul leaves the body, it's like unplugging your computer and the battery's gone. It's discharged. Nothing could work. At the time of death, all the components, the brain is still there, and the heart is there, and the lungs, and the pancreas, and the eyes, and the nose, and everything's still there. But there's no current, there's no consciousness. The consciousness is the symptom of the presence of the living force, the Atma soul, which is a part of the Supreme Soul. I thank you all very much. It's really, truly an honor and pleasure.